on Elm Street. Okay. Was a ferry service in the early 1800s, before there were bridges built.
Pishon's Ferry?
Nope,
That was further than.
Morris Ferry. That's what it was, Morris Ferry. It was before they had bridges built, and so it was to get people from one side of the river to the next. So he came and he saw the information we had, and then he discovered the Filbert Pottery Factory, which was in, again, 1809, so it's the early 1800s. And it was interesting because he had found shards of those pottery that we find at the History House at Heirloom Gardens at the dig. So his comment was, it's really unusual. It's rare to be able to find an artifact and its source. So I thought that was real interesting. He also found perhaps some original artifacts from the Benedict Arnold Trail, going up the river in 1775. They went right up Elm Street and up toward Norridgewock, up to Quebec on their field journey. So anyway, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, yeah, so that was a good summary of what I'd like to talk to you all about today. So jumping right into it. So what I do as archaeology is private sector archaeology, consulting archaeology. So in the United States, something like between 75 and 95% of all the archaeologists and all the archaeological work that's done is done for consulting, for permitting, and not actually very few archaeologists are connected to things like universities and do actual research based archaeology. So a lot of there are laws in the United States that were enacted starting around in the 40s that recognize archaeological sites as natural resources. So just like trees and wetlands and different animals, plants are recognized as natural resources, so as our history and our archaeological sites. And when a developer is going to put in a new road, a new Walmart, a new housing development, wind or solar, they often, depending on what they're doing and how it's being funded, will have to have permits that show that they have looked for archaeological resources, and that if there are archaeological resources where they're going to be developing, that they have been either properly studied or protected for the future. So that's what a lot of archaeology is actually done in the United States for, is for that kind of permitting process, that development process. So what we were looking at a hydroelectric dam relicensing on the Kennebec, and every 30 years or so, the dams have to be relicensed through the federal government. So as part of that, they have to do the different natural resource studies. So we get to go out and look at what may or may not be here. So the type of work we do, this compliance archaeology, it does follow, although it is not like a research orientated like you might have at a university. We do have a set general guidelines, general steps of what we will try to accomplish through these to be able to get to the point where we can make determinations on, is there a archaeological site present, and is it significant? Is it something that we would recommend should be saved for future generations, or more work done on it if it's going to ultimately be destroyed in the development process? So first step is background research, where we go and we look at the area that we're going to study. We look at the local history, come to our historical societies for help, or libraries. Sometimes if you're looking at, early settlement, you look at the town halls and the deeds, the property deeds. And then, so you'll look at both the Native American history, what is known in the area, and the Euro-American history, which that comes afterwards. And then we also look at the natural history, the geology, how the landscape has changed and evolved over time, because that can help us tell us things about the archaeological sites that could be important. After the background research, after we've kind of learned about where it is we're going, we go out there, we actually look at it, we walk over, usually do a walking survey to see what might be just present on the ground, what the landscape looks like. Are there old cellar holes that are easily determined? Is there things coming out of the riverbanks that will tell us, start to give us more information as to what might be there archaeologically? After that point, if it's determined that more work is need to be done, that's when we get our screens and our sifting screens and our shovels out, and we actually start doing excavations. So this is done usually at a survey level, where not unlike surveyors, we pick a transect or an azimuth, and we start very methodically searching for archaeological sites, for artifacts, digging as we go, recording things, recording the soils that we're seeing in our pits, where artifacts are coming from in those pits, and keeping things on a set scale. So we're not just kind of digging where we feel like we should dig. We're actually doing it very methodically, so that we can almost statistically say that we have covered an area. So again, kind of depending on what comes from that, we will, if we find archaeological sites that appear to be, have the potential to be interesting to the local or even national history, we need to start doing some evaluation, some deeper evaluation of that. That's where we start doing what many people would actually kind of recognize more as archaeology, where we're digging much bigger pits. We're not moving all over the landscape. We're focused in one place. We'll have our instead of just shovels and sifting screens, we'll have brushes and dustpans and hand trowels, and actually be doing a lot more fine level work to really try to start answering research questions that we would need to answer to make the kind of determinations about, is this a significant site that needs to be preserved or studied more, or is this a site that is more common in the natural resource landscape and could be destroyed during the development process and nothing significant would be lost. If we do determine the site is significant, then we would go into what we would refer to as a data recovery, where we're excavating larger areas now. We're really trying to get all the information that we can out of the site, because we know it's significant and that it's going to be destroyed. We at heart, we are conservationists, and we don't want these sites to be destroyed. Our first recommendation to our developers are, if possible, we would like to preserve this in place. Maybe we can move the development around it in some way to preserve this for future generations, because we realize that we don't know everything about archaeology now, and it would be wrong of us to assume that we could get all the information out of a site that would be important. So we really, and future generations might have other things that they are interested about that we're not interested right now, that they could go back to a site and excavate and try and get that information for themselves. So conservation is preservation in place is what we really strive for first. But if we do go to data recovery, the idea is try to not necessarily excavate the entire site, but enough of it that we've answered all the significant questions we need to. So what does this look like? Research, like I said, we're going to look at what is known in the area about our Native American groups who used to occupy the landscape and still do a lot of places. The artifacts that they left behind, stories and notes that they told the later Euro-American folks who came. Like this map here is actually a map of the Penobscot River that someone who was exploring it went up the river with some native guides and who pointed out the places that the native tribal people would camp along the river. And we can use information like that to get a sense on the landscape of where those type of camps might be found. Or in instances like that, you might even be able to go right to the spot still. And of course, there are Native groups still here in Maine, still present, still telling us about their history. So we can often talk to them and actually get a, straight from their voice what they know of their history. And then looking at the Euro-American historic side of things, we will, often look at some of the early maps, town histories, and start at kind of the high level, and then as we find things that we think might be interesting, diving into it. These atlas maps, there was a series of these kind of county and town level atlas maps that were produced in the 1800s that have a wealth of information. Hard to see at this scale, but there's names of the people who were living there at the time, the little symbols of where their houses were, other information like the road systems. We can look and see if the roads have changed, because or people who are going to live near to the roads, right? So if we see that the road pattern has changed, that might tell us that there's something more to see. And then any of the natural features that these maps might show us, like the rivers and streams might not always be the most accurately drawn, but they can still tell us stuff about how the people were seeing these features and what was important to them. And then on the natural side, the natural history, we will often look at the geology. This is a map of right here and down around the bend of the river in Skowhegan, and all the little different colors, symbols that you see there are the different soils. So we will, we pay attention to the soils because there are definitely correlations between where humans live and what type of soils are found. You're not usually going to find someone living in a wet soil area. So that can kind of give us some clues ahead of time about places where we might want to live, or where people were living that we might want to look for sites. All right, what do these look like? So here is us doing our walkover, our reconnaissance level survey. We were paying most of the attention to the river banks between Fairfield and Skowhegan. So we had some boating assistance that helped us get up and down the river without having to actually, trek along the riverbank itself. So we could stop and pop out on different places and look some more. And what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for evidence of humans. So here is a pile of bricks. Not very spectacular, but it does tell us that someone was there and that something significant happened, because that's quite a few bricks. So, you might be looking at something like an old chimney that fell onto the riverbank or was pushed or was dumped. So these will be a little bit harder to see, but you see all the metal hoops in the kind of the middle of the shot. So those are cask hoops, barrel hoops, and before the cardboard box, there was the barrel, the cardboard box of its day. So you often find just piles of cask hoops, where because the nice thing about barrels is that you can break them down, you can take the staves out, you can kind of put them away, or when you get to the where they're using metal hoops for the casks, they can be stored. Even if the wood goes bad, you can reuse them or throw them away. More evidence here of people being present on the landscape. So you can see the kind of green discolored oblong object right at the bottom of a big rock. It's a spike of some type, and then there's actually concrete with bricks around it. So the evidence of something going on here, maybe some sort of structure. And then smaller things like ceramics and smaller nails. So that's what we're keeping our eyes out for while we're doing these walkovers. The reconnaissance level, that's when we actually start digging and digging some more and digging. And these are all holes from right here. So what you'll notice is that we are very meticulous in how we excavate these holes. We are meticulous because we have to control the way we're excavating to really understand the artifacts that we're finding. So we dig a square hole so that we can expand it into larger and larger squares, basically. So you start small and you can expand out and look at a larger area. And then we dig, usually we dig down almost as far as we can go with a shovel, especially when we're working so close to the river, because when you're close to the river, you're getting flood deposits. And the flood deposits are coming in maybe even on a yearly basis, bringing in new sediment, burying archaeological deposits. So you might have to look a lot deeper than you would if you were up on the valley margin above where it's flooding, where you only have to dig a little, just a little bit down, and because there isn't anything up on the valley margins that's depositing sediment like down on down in the valleys. And again, like I said, this is survey work for the most part. So we're picking a line, not necessarily arbitrarily, but somewhere that makes sense. And we are excavating at a very set standard, a set distance between every one of those holes is an exact 10 meters. We use metric. We're scientists, so we use metric in all our measurements. So each one of those dots on the map represents one of our hand shovel tests, and they will be as close to 10 meters apart as we can without getting a tape measure out. We usually pace things, and these days we use our GPSs, as long as we're getting good signal to line ourselves up and make sure we're where we need to be.
Where is it?
Now that picture is in an undisclosed location. It's I believe it's in oh, I forget. I think it's across the river from Hinckley.
Yeah, you can see it's floodplain agricultural land.
Yep. All right, so now we're going on to the site evaluation, where we've found a site. So and we've got a site we'll talk about a little bit later tonight that we found, and we're actually getting we're digging more holes and more targeted locations to try and answer research questions. And like I said, bigger holes now. So before you were seeing holes that were 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters. This is a meter by a meter square. And we've excavated down to 1.5 meters. So not only does the bigger hole means more artifacts, more data, it means we can actually go deeper, because now we aren't limited by the length of our shovel. We can actually get in the hole and go a little bit deeper and continue looking to see if the artifact deposits go deeper. And then data recovery, where again, bigger holes, more people, more going on, more questions to try and answer, and a lot more data to try and gather. So again, bigger holes. We've got our dust pans and our brushes out and our smaller shovels, and we're really getting down and doing fine level work, really paying attention very, very closely to where things are coming from, and looking for evidence of human activity. So again, kind of hard to see, but there's a darker color right in the center of the excavation square with a few rocks around it. Most likely a Native American hearth or campfire. This is not from here. This is from a location in Massachusetts. All right, so let's talk more now about what actually we learned, or what, set the stage for what went on during our study. So talking about the Kennebec River, when we're talking about Euro-American period occupations, starting around the 1600s, we have Popham right at the mouth of the river, and then focused mainly on the coast, of course, in the early settlement period. That's where people could easily access European people. And then starting to move inland in the mid 1600s, you get your settlements as far up as Augusta, mostly, again, sticking to the river itself. But at that point in time, that's, things start to heat up between the different cultural groups, the English and the French and the Native Americans, really turned Maine into a war zone and depopulated most of the interior for almost the next 100 years. No one could get along, obviously, and it took a long time, and the result of the French and Indian War before English settlers could start getting into the interior along Kennebec again. So by the mid 1700s, you start to see English settlement returning, you get a series of forts being built to kind of as a protective shield. And then as it was 1763, you get a settlement as far up as the Waterville and Winslow area. And then by the mid 1770s, that's when we start to get up into our neck of the woods here with settlement. So what did settlement look like as far as occupying the landscape? It was one of the things that we wanted to understand, so we knew where to look for things when we were out in the field looking. So what I came to understand from reading a lot of the early histories of the towns in this stretch is that the initial settlements are usually said they're on the riverbanks. That's repeated again and again. Our first cabin was on the riverbank. So why is that? Because the river is your main transportation route. There were no roads. If you're going to be connected to the outside world, you need to be close to the river. So you see the first 20 to 30 years of the initial settlements are kind of focused right on the river. After that point, so yeah, we're down here on the river, on the floodplains. After that point, when people are starting to get really established on the landscape, you start to see them move away from the rivers up to the valley margins, because that's where they're building the roads in this area, which makes sense. You want to keep them out of the floodplain as much as possible so they're not getting washed away. So we've moved from down by the river to up on the valley margins. And this is reflected in the maps as well. Where this map is from the 1850s, I believe, somewhere around that area, where you can see that the roads have been developed. Usually in this area, they were being developed about 50 years earlier than this map. The dotted line is the railroads. So you see additional development of that, taking the focus away from the river and making it towards more traditional European methods of transportation. And then briefly, what people are doing during this period. Of course, the first thing you're going to be doing is focusing on subsistence. So you're going to be mostly farming. Logging was something that people were able to take advantage of early on as well. And then when usually fairly quickly, you do start to see water powered milling come in to these communities as well. Again, focusing on the river, using that resource to start some small industry. So this might be well known to some of you, but we wanted to look into the early history of Skowhegan, and we wanted to see where the settlements were and who the settlers were. So Peter Heywood and Joseph Weston are generally seen as the first settlers in Skowhegan, not known as Skowhegan at the time. They called it Canaan at first, and then I believe it was Bloomfield after that. Fascinating amount of history on those two. I won't go into it in a lot of depth, but the story of them coming up with their sons and leaving their sons on the island over winter while they went back home. It's a very interesting, very different time to live in. So looking at Peter Heywood, So settling in around 1773 on lots 14, 15, and 16. It was described as a large intervale, which is just another word for floodplain. That was a natural meadow. So obviously that's going to be somewhere you're going to want, because one of the first things most people had to do as part of these early settlements was to improve the land, which means they needed to clear like 5 acres or something and start putting in gardens and orchards and structures. So if you already had a natural meadow, you were ahead of the game. And then it couldn't really find a lot of in the records where his early, his cabin would have been, but it does say that he moved up from the vicinity of the riverbank to the valley margin. I imagine kind of where Coburn's Lane is today, or at the end of Coburn's Lane. And then Joseph Weston, the first, moved in the area at the same time. Another interesting personal history with him and his involvement in Benedict Arnold's armies. Marched up the river, got some of the patriotic spirit when they came up and decided to help them at least get up to Norridgewock, but unfortunately at that point he got sick and came home and died shortly afterwards. And his lots were 11, 12, and 13, so right next to Haywood's. Again, fairly tragic. He would have only him and his family would have only been here for about 2 to 3 years at the time that he died. So still very much in that pioneering phase of settlement. And a very interesting, we found at the History House, at one point there was a estate inventory of what he had. And unfortunately that's quite small for many of us to read, but that was everything that his family had at the time when they inventoried. So beds, bedsteads, a desk, chairs, looking glass, flat irons, pewter plates, and dishes, basins, an iron kettle, a crane and tramettes, and a tea kettle. That was everything that would have been like a personal item that they had in their house. That's that first column. And then pretty much everything else in this list would have been things that were outside use implements. So we have our traps for trapping, saws, linen wheel. They were, I believe Weston was a tailor. So that might not have just been for his wife to use. That could have been something he was trained in as well. Warming pans, hand saws, hatchets, tailor's gooseland. And if anyone knows what a gooseland is, I'd love to know, because I couldn't find that for all the Googling in the world. Brass kettle, brass skimmer. So these would probably be things you're using for outside work. Axes, a shave, a trowel, iron wedge, guns and augers, and a cloth loom. And animals, he had quite a nice little herd of cows, about 20 different cows and cattle, including oxen and some pigs as well, which fits well with the early narrative that said that when he came up with his sons and with Peter Heywood, that they brought a herd of cattle with them. And then tools that you would use with your animals, your yokes and log chains, draft chains, plows and harrows, and some cart wheels. They also had some food stores like corn, rye, potatoes, pork, some hides probably for trading. And it does list that they had a barn at that time. So I found a pretty amazing little, this is not depicting Weston's pioneer cabin, but this is pretty much exactly what they're describing. So you've got probably a one-room cabin. You can see behind the cabin that those are stumps where they've started to clear the land. Like I said, they had to improve their land. A little kitchen garden, a barn out back, and amazingly, if you can see under the little awning to the side, a couple of spare wagon wheels, just like was listed in Weston's. And then members of the family working in the garden, and most likely the male of the patriarch in the back, starting to work the land to make a larger garden. And if you can see, this picture shows something that Weston didn't have. So in the background, where he's starting to bust up the land for a larger garden, he has horses. So Weston didn't have any horses. There weren't any roads. He didn't need horses. So, and he had his oxen, and so he was able to work the way he needed to. So yeah, at that time when he was living there, the river was still the main source of transportation. And then he had some sons, Joseph Weston II and Samuel Weston. And I mentioned them because it very explicitly says that their log cabins were right on the river. And then within a period of time, they moved their occupations from near the riverbank out of the floodplain and up to the positions closer to the road. And interestingly, there was a lot of recycling back then too. They would bring their cabin up and reuse it as an outbuilding, or in Samuel Weston's case, it might have been the basis for his first store that he built. And here's the early plat map. Here's the Hayward lots, and here are the Western lots. And then, so it's kind of looking at where those would be today. Here's the USGS topographic map, and that's roughly where those would be. And then that's kind of where they would be on the aerial. So fairly big chunks of land, near the islands, which fits in the narrative saying how they came up and were on those islands first. And they did own parts or most of those islands, at least initially. So why are these guys important? Well, we'll get back to that. So the next interesting thing after our early settlement, that actually it happens at the same time as the early settlement, is the Revolutionary War. And particularly important historically to this area is Benedict Arnold and his march to Quebec. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail of that, but they did come through the area between Winslow and Skowhegan. The Army did between September 25th and October 4th, 1775. There are a surprising wealth of journals from the men, mostly the officers, detailing their trip upriver. Details vary from day to day, but oftentimes they will record. I'll be generous and say what they thought they did as far as miles a day. They differ greatly in their estimates. When you look into the journals and what was going on, they weren't moving as an army. They were moving by divisions. So there were 4 divisions with the Army. They moved basically independent of each other, where one division would start upriver and then maybe another one would fall later that day or the next day or the next. So he had about 1,000 or so troops, a little bit more than that. So we're talking about groups of men of about 250 to 300 at a time. So why do we want to think about this as far as archaeology? Well, they stopped along the way to make camp because they could only make it so far every day. And before all the dams on the river, many sections of the Kennebec were recorded as being very rocky. So they couldn't really, they're going upstream against the current in bateaus. They're flat bottom boats, and they had to often get out and walk their boats through the rapids. So it wasn't an easy stretch of river for them. So what I did was there's a lot of speculation about where the different camps are on this stretch of river, because like I said, the mileage varies a lot as to between areas that because they do list areas that we can readily figure out where they were stopping. Like they stopped in Canaan, which is Skowhegan, obviously. So what I looked at here with this graph is the colors represent what I interpret from the journals as different camps that they made. So the red is when they're at Fort Halifax and down in Winslow, because that's kind of the starting point on this part of the journey upriver. And then the orange camp is a little confusing, but it doesn't appear that everyone stopped there. If it's even really is a camp that's different from some of the others, but that would have been somewhere between Winslow and the Shawmut area. And then the green is Shawmut. So it's pretty clear that they were stopping at Shawmut. Most of the divisions stopped there. There was a doctor, Dr. Surter, I believe. I forget exactly. Center. Yeah. Okay. And he kind of traveled independent of all of the divisions, and he kept his own journal. But he definitely stopped in the Shawmut area. And then there's a very disjointed recording of miles that seems to place several divisions camping roughly in the Hinckley area. And then a lot of the divisions, all of the divisions stopped at Canaan and camped at the Haywoods, which is the blue on here. So the purple are the kind of around the Hinckley area, and the blue is Canaan. So the way I looked at this, it's kind of a law of averages as well, where they're saying they're going so many miles upriver, but they're clearly saying they stopped at the Haywoods. So kind of using that knowledge that, well, some people said they went 7 miles upstream to get to the Haywoods. Some people said they went 4 miles upstream to get to the Haywoods. Lots of differences. So my gut feeling is that the Hinckley area, they might have all been camping in the same area. They just had a lot of different measurements of how they got there. So again, if we look at the map, the very bottom of the map is Shawmut. Hinckley is kind of the three in the middle. The town or the village of Hinckley is right in the middle of those three. So that's where, like I said, they're kind of saying they're all over the place around there, and they very well could have been. But my suspicion is there might have been one place they were stopping there. And then the furthest one at the top is when they were at Canaan. And these are, this map is just the general area where they were camping. We don't know for sure. This is just kind of the generalized. So zooming in a little bit more, again, they were clearly stopping at Shawmut, probably right in the area where the village and the dam is today. To my knowledge, no one has looked for that camp, and it might be pretty well disturbed because it's the area down there by the dam is pretty developed. These are the three general areas where the Hinckley camps might have been. Again, hard to say because the mileage varies. And then when we get upstream to Canaan, they're pretty consistently saying they're stopping at Howard's, or which obviously they meant Haywood's, or something interestingly called Mechanic's Landing, which is mentioned by one journal, but the mileage puts them at Haywood's place. And then Arnold, rather, I guess, kind of famously dined with the Westons, but didn't stop that night. He went further upstream. Upstream past the falls, which must have been really fun to pull all those boats up over. So thinking of more, now we have kind of an idea where they were stopping, thinking about exactly where these campsites might be. You know, up until Winslow area, they were clearly stopping at people's homes and, you know, staying next to the places where people actually were. Once they got up above Winslow, it was the howling wilderness, apparently, uninhabited by human beings. But it's also clear that they were trying to stop where people were. Like in Canaan, they stopped at the Westons, at the Haywoods. So the two things we would think about then is that they are looking for places where people are. So obviously they want to be around people. And when you're fighting upriver all day, you're not going to want to pull your boat way up away from the water. You're just going to pull it up onto the bank. So you're going to be next to the bank. So the settlements, the cabins are near the banks, and you're not going to want to really pull your boat away from too far. So they're going to be camping on the banks, which is right where we're looking for this study. So what would these camps look like? Do they look like our kind of classic Valley Forge? No. They look more like this. Just a couple of people around their boat and around a fire. And the next day, this is probably what it would look like. Just the remains of a campfire, maybe some matted down grass. So how are we going to find these? We're talking about places that were occupied for one night by a couple hundred men. What could they possibly leave us to find?
No comment.
Sure.
Some white objects you showed before appeared like pipe bowls, ceramic one-use pipe. And I don't know how early they went. One I found in my raspberry patch had a little early steamboat on it.
Oh, really?
1820.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they go further back.
Oh, yeah, they go back to that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. They were disposable. They would have left them behind. If they, you know, that, and especially the big long ones, those are made that long so that you could break the stem off as you used it. So where we went to look to try and figure out what we should be looking for was up to the Dead River Historical Society, who have been working up that way. A bunch of the members have been working on the overland routes that the Army took. And this is what they've been finding. Bullets, axe heads, and lots of nails from the boats. And then down in the corner, in the right-hand corner, that's like lead waste for making more bullets. So there's some of the nails, the more detailed nails. These are rose head nails. They're wrought. They're pretty much handmade. And then they also were finding things like utensils. So when we went to look, using the example of the Haywoods, so again, kind of the top of this topographic map, you see the kind of the whitish flat area near the river. That's the interval, the floodplain. That would have been where the Haywoods were. So we looked along there with metal detectors. So what we saw that they were finding up in the north was a lot of metal objects, and that's the easiest way to find metal is with a metal detector. So we often use those when we're looking at like military sites. Not only do we excavate, but we also use the metal detectors and to help zone in on things going on with the military, because there's usually a higher amount of metal with them. So here's a map of what we found. So the little blue circles or little white circles are our shovel tests where we were actually digging. And then the smaller diamonds are our metal detection hits. And you'll notice we have two areas that are kind of demarcated with red, where we found some interesting stuff. Oops. So here we are metal detecting, and again, metal objects. These are not the bullets we're looking for, but we did find quite a few of these where someone was clearly at target practicing at some point. So what we found, there's some of the metal objects that we found, and then other ceramics that we were finding as well. But the interesting things we found were rosehead nails and utensils. So the four nails on the left-hand side, those are found in one area, all spatially next to each other within a few feet. And the utensils and the two utensils, one is a knife and one is a spoon handle or perhaps a fork handle, and two rosehead nails. Those were all found together as well. So again, what was being found in areas that they know Arnold and his men were at: rosehead nails, knives, forks, and spoons. So that's a pretty intriguing, at least coincidence, if nothing else. We looked a little bit further down towards the end of that floodplain and found another area where we have a close association of 4 more rosehead nails, which, if you compare the kind of the less corroded nail on the left-hand side to the one from the Dead River Society, they're almost exactly the same length, size, pretty clearly the same nail. And then if you look at this one, the nail on top, it's got a little cinch where it was pounded into a board, and then the tip of it bent. You can see our second nail from the left is also cinched in almost the same way. So are these 3 areas we found the Arnold's Army camps? Unfortunately, I would have to say it's at best inconclusive. We need more evidence. We need to look at the artifacts a lot more, but they are the right age. They're in the right place. Alternative explanations, though, are that they were left by the Haywoods. You remember the Haywoods are there at the exact same time, right? They would have most likely gotten their nails from the same place that the boat makers got their nails, because the boats were made down river on the Kennebec. So they're most likely getting the nails from the same place. Possibly the same with the utensils, or they could just be older. They could be artifacts from a later generation that were thrown there as trash. Because a lot of times people throw their trash in the river, right?
What about logging operations? Because every year, just every year, they probably had some boats every now and then.
Yeah. So that's where we're left with the with these artifacts. Very compelling evidence that they could be from Arnold's expedition, but still room for our archaeologists from the future to come in, or any researcher really, and take a better look at them. And I think that we're running pretty close to time. So anyone have any questions we want to?
Where do those nails and pieces land?
Where do they land?
If you wouldn't mind repeating the questions for the online people.
Okay, sure. So what will happen to the artifacts now that the study is done? So in the state of Maine, all artifacts belong to the landowner, and the landowners where these artifacts were found have kindly decided to donate them to the History House. So they will be kept at the History House in perpetuity, so that they can be studied or enjoyed by folks in the future.
How did you get involved with this? Did you read Kenneth Roberts as a kid?
Yeah,
You started.
I read Arundel a lot later in life than I should have, but no, we were, it was just just fate, I guess. We're just random chance that the company I was working for got contracted to come and look at this part of the study.
That big group of nails that was found up in Dead River, were they found in one area, or is that just from a large area and then they just flew them all again? So those are all unused, maybe a keg.
It very, very well could have been a keg. They have actually done some amazing work up there where they have actually, through their metal detecting efforts, found nails that when you look at where they were being found in the landscape, actually outline a boat. Because when they went over river, when they went over land, it got really hard, obviously, if anyone knows the story of that expedition, and they started divesting themselves of everything they could. But yes, they have found most likely kegs of nails and even bullets, cases of bullets, where like someone took the bullet case they no longer wanted to carry and they hid it behind a tree.
They wouldn't carry a keg with them if they got rid of the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I worked on one of those digs up there for Maine Historic Preservation
Yep.
several years ago. We found that box of bullets. 96 pounds of musket bullets.
Yeah.
Varying in size from about 72 caliber down to 30.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could see from that picture, there were many different sizes.
The idea behind the different calibers was that you could load your musket with buck and ball, or 3 or 4 buckshot
Right.
on top of the ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was it a box?
Yep, it was in a box. The box was partially intact.
Is that a
The
keg?
lead was- the lead had,
Oh yeah.
And they're painted
Surface
musket
reserve.
balls.
Any questions from online?
There was a question online asking if all of the holes were dug by hand or if some machines were used as well.
Okay, so question about how we dug those holes. Yes, we dig all those holes by hand. There are some instances where we will use the assistance of excavators, but that's usually to remove fill, actual fill like gravel or something like that to get to levels where we need to look for the archaeology. And that at that point, we'll start using hand excavations again. Yep.
Nathan, could you explain about the pottery, how you knew that what you found in Shawmut was?
Sure. Let me see here. Let me exit out of this. Back to my. Oh. So in another site, am I screen sharing still?
No.
Okay. Hold on just a second. So I'll make sure the folks at home can see. All right. So another site that we found downstream in Fairfield was a ferry keeper's house. Very interesting, intact. That the short story is that it was one of that, as best as we can tell, it was the actual location of one of the early pioneer settlers' houses that was later used as a ferry keeper's house, ferrying people back and forth. This was Noble's Ferry down by Nye's Corner. And it was very interesting. We found a lot of ceramic there that was dates to a very concise time period, because ceramic was used, different types of ceramic was used for long periods of time in some cases, but these all kind of pointed right towards the age range of about the 1790s to the 1850s. So kind of right in the spot where the historic research said that the first people on that land were settling. And we found a lot of redware there with this nice red glaze on it. And when I came up here to do my ferry research, there we go. I found that there was a potter right at the History House who was rather well known for his redware, Mr. Philbrick. And when I looked at some of the pieces that they had there, I mean, this shard that we found could be right from the lip of that milk pan. So I think it's very strong possibility that the redware that we're seeing down there in that Fairfield site most likely came from Philbrick's works. The one caveat I will give you is that redware is a very common type of ware that was made in a lot of places. So if we wanted to be conclusive about it, we'd have to do some chemical analyses on the artifacts. The artifacts in this case have been retained by the landowner, and I've been working with him, and hopefully someday he will donate them to the Fairfield Historical Society. So thank you for reminding me.
Typically, how close would potters be? You have 5 or 6 up and down the river?
I don't know, but you do seem, just like you'll have a Starbucks going right across from a Dunkin' Donuts, sometimes they just all kind of congregate. It probably has a lot with potters. It will do a lot with the clay, because they need to be close to their clay source. Clay is everywhere on the Kennebec. Yeah, you have the nice Pezumscot formation. I don't know how good it is for pottery, but it's definitely very easy to find.
It's good for the builder.
Yeah.
We did find a lot of shards in the heirloom garden.
Yep.
In my gardens next door. I think I showed them.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Were they redware or were they domestic or glazed pattern pottery?
I would think the redware.
Yeah, there were some different types. There was some ironstone, but there were several redware that you did give to me to look at.
Pretty common when you need to find these things.
Yeah.
And nails. a
Yeah.
whole collection of those sort of needles.
No. All right. Yeah.
You come across any Native American sites in your survey?
Well, we were contracted just to do the historical stuff, but yes, we definitely did find some. It's I wouldn't say inevitable, but being close to the river, of course. And for sensitivity reasons, I'm not going to say where we found them, but there are Native American sites out there.
What disposition did you make of those?
What disposition?
Did you make of the Native American?
The few that we found appeared to be intact sites, but we did very little research on them to be able to say, what the sites were. We did find some Native American ceramic pieces, which is not very common in this part of the state, and some stone chips.
Did they go to the state or the tribes?
With the folks that had been contracted to look at the Native American side of that took over that part of the research after we found it. So I actually couldn't tell you where they went, but
The right people came.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a project like this, you have to do a lot of reading and research and county courthouse digging, reading tome after tome of written material, or how much
Yeah.
of that is involved?
So your question about the type of research and how much reading we do, it varies. Kind of how I said it took you through like the steps of the different types of research we do. When we start, our initial research will be kind of broader overview, and then it will get finer grained when we're looking at actual sites, but more detailed, if that makes sense. So we'll be doing more research, but on specific things like specific families, or in the case of Native American stuff, we might be looking at specific sites that are like the site that we found. So being able to compare things. But yes, we'll do, especially when you're looking at historical period sites, you'll almost inevitably end up at the courthouse looking at the deeds at some point. So, any more online questions?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
When the troops came up the river, did they mostly stay on the east side where the fort were, or were they on both sides of the river?
So a question about which side of the river the troops mostly stayed on. I don't know that, because the journals don't really say. They just say like, we camped, so I think a lot of them were, the picture I got was that you just slogged up river for 12 hours and you're only going to write in your journal, we stopped here. But at least through this stretch, it seems like mostly the west side. I mean, the Canaan camps are on the west side. Shawmut, the only place to camp at the Shawmut area is on the west side. In the Hinckley area, right by the bridge, there is a nice big flat area by the bridge. It's on Pishons across the way. It's not quite as much flat area, but maybe you could camp there. Yeah.
Did you come across any housing piles of rocks where a house would have been built with a 4-foot basement or something in that?
Yep. So the question is, do we come across any remains of houses or foundations? So the Ferry Keeper site had a stone foundation that had collapsed in on itself. And when we first found it, it was barely a depression in the ground. And we probably would have missed it, except the landowner was very interested in the history of his land, and it had been pointed out to him by his father, and even though they weren't descendants of the original Ferry Keeper in their family, they knew the history of their land, so they were able to say, oh yeah, go over there. And that you know, that's where I was always told was the ferry keeper's house. And even though it didn't look like much, it definitely was a foundation when you got into it. So
Does the landowner own that foundation?
yep, it's a question about ownership. So again, in the state of Maine, the artifacts, the sites do belong to the landowner. So it, while we need to gain permission usually to go onto the land and do any excavations, any type of archaeological work. And usually in that permission, we will ask to be able to take the artifacts away, to be able to study them for a temporary basis. Could be a few months, could be a few years, and then eventually they would go back to the landowner. We do often recommend that they consider donating to a historical society or museum, especially if, like with the Ferry Keeper's house, we did determine it was a rather significant site, and you know, it would be great if those artifacts could go somewhere where they're going to be kept for people to do additional research on. Yeah.
So let's look at that situation. What kind of artifacts should we preserve?
Well, everything pretty much that we find should be preserved. You'll get into certain situations of architectural artifacts. So bricks, there, depending on who you are, there's only so much that a brick can tell you. So if you find like an entire chimney's worth of bricks, if you can imagine putting those in the history house, an entire chimney, probably not going to be very efficient, and it's not going to tell you a whole lot. So something like that, we would look for the best preserved examples, like some whole bricks, if they have maker's marks on them, things like that. A representative sample that isn't the whole thing, but can still tell people about it. Same with nails. Not, you know, like when we have something rare, like with the Arnold's expedition nails, you wouldn't want to keep all of those, but you don't necessarily want to save every nail if they're all the same type of nail, that if you're, you know, from a house. More?
I'm sorry. What about the stones?
Like the foundation stones, we typically don't take those away. We leave those in place.
So a cornerstone or a sign stone, does it?
Again, there wouldn't be much research value that I think people would be able to gain from having those stones. The value would be leaving them where they are, so that people can come and see how they were, you know, how they were stacked when if they're an intact foundation, or even how they fell over, because that may be able to tell you how the structure collapsed or what happened to it afterwards, so that you know the whole picture, the whole story of the site. Yeah.
Is there any indication that Oak Island and the island below it were connected? And I asked that because for a specific reason, in the history of Norwich Walk, they refer to the army camped on an island. Okay. Neither one of them looked big enough.
So the question is about the islands, Oak Island and the other islands in Skowhegan. There is no mention in any of the journals of them camping on islands when they get to the Skowhegan area. They very specifically say they camp on the Haywoods or the Westons, with the exception of that. The one journal says they camped at something landing. I forget the exact name of it, but again, I interpret that as being Haywoods. Geologically, would those islands have been connected? It's possible they could have been connected, and it's possible that they could have been connected to the river banks at points in time. Especially which one is the one that's closer to the east side? Is that Oaks Island?
No, according to the map that you showed, it's closer to the west.
Yeah, the one of them one island is relatively close to the eastern bank today, and I think it could have been attached in the past. But those islands also look to me to be relatively stable. I think they've been there for quite some time. Obviously, the river will change them a little bit, but I think they've relatively been there. And there's definitely, you can see on different historic maps, there's been different smaller islands downstream from them, which sometimes are connected and sometimes aren't. Yeah, the freshets will do quite a bit to move those smaller islands away sometimes. So, yeah.
The westerns of those early pioneers, they were specific lots. Who laid those out? How were those laid out?
How are they? So how are the early lots laid out? There were groups of investors, usually in Massachusetts, who land speculated, and they bought up a bunch of land in Maine. Like the Plymouth company, I think, was one of them. I'm not sure that they were up here, but they would hire surveyors to come out here and actually survey the lots. And Joseph, the son, or Sam, one of the two sons, was a surveyor who did a lot of surveying. They were multi-faceted people back then, where they were doing lots of different things to make a living. And he did a lot of surveying. You can still find his maps online, like a Maine Memory Network. I think I found some online, but very, very detailed. Sometimes they're very detailed. Sometimes they just show a square with some very unhelpful markers, like the old oak tree, or the the point of land that's 5 paces from Charlie's lot or something like that. It's like, okay, well, I don't know who Charlie is, and it'll take forever to find it. But anyone who's done research into deeds, that's the further back you go, the more interesting it gets. So, yeah.
So a question online about how you got into the field of Maine archaeology.
How did I get into the field of Maine archaeology? I grew up in New Sharon and went to school at Mount Blue High School. And as in high school, when the guidance counselors started pestering you about what you wanted to do, I said probably history. And I'd always been interested in archaeology as well. And I got connected with the folks at UMF. There was an archaeology department there at the time with a lab, and we talked to them, and they said, well, hey, if you want to come in and volunteer in the lab on your free periods, which I thought was great. And looking at it in retrospect, I see that I gave them 2 semesters worth of free labor, which I'm sure they went a long way for them. But they're great people. I still am in contact with them. And then eventually I took a class with Dr. Peterson, who was teaching there at the time, an intro level class, and that kind of cinched it for me, and went on to college. I don't work exclusively in Maine. I actually live in Rhode Island right now, and I've worked all over the eastern United States, Puerto Rico, and some other places. It's very much, you got to go where the work is, especially in the contract world. So. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
That was actually my question too. For country stars.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted.
Jeremy,